He always believed their love was unbreakable, their marriage built on honesty. But in her final moments, she revealed the secrets she'd carried throughout their entire life together. The year was 1955. America remained divided by invisible lines of color, with racial segregation still firmly entrenched in the social fabric. The Jim Crow laws dictated every aspect of a black man's existence, where he could walk, eat, sit, or even direct his gaze. Interracial relationships weren't merely frowned upon, they invited danger. A black man discovered in the wrong place with a white woman could face beatings, imprisonment, or worse. While the South enforced these unwritten rules with particular brutality, the North offered little true sanctuary. Elijah Matthews learned these harsh realities early. Born into poverty in a small southern town, he watched his father and men like him struggle beneath a system designed to keep them subordinate. His father worked endless hours at a factory while his mother spent more time cleaning white people's homes than tending to her own. From his earliest days, Elijah learned to repair automobiles alongside his uncles, developing an intuitive understanding of how engines breathed and strained under continuous labor. By 18, Elijah had become a skilled mechanic at a small auto shop, one of the few occupations where a black man could earn an honest living without directly serving white employers. Tall and lean, with skin like polished ebony, Elijah possessed a quiet confidence that unsettled white men and fascinated white women, a dangerous combination in his world. Yet he had always been cautious enough to avoid such hazards, having witnessed the consequences when black boys allowed their gaze to linger too long on white skin, until he met Rebecca Ashford. Rebecca had never known want. Born into a prominent white family, she spent her childhood dressed in silk and expensive shoes, her days structured by etiquette lessons and social events designed to mold her into the perfect Southern wife. Her father, William Ashford, wielded significant influence, a businessman whose wealth stemmed not only from investments, but from the power he held over others. He believed firmly in bloodlines, in purity, in the inherent superiority of those who shared his complexion, but Rebecca had never felt at home in her father's world. She grew up suffocating under expectations she had no desire to fulfill. She was supposed to be quiet, obedient, demure. Instead, she was curious, restless, constantly searching for something beyond the perfect life mapped out for her. The night she met Elijah, she was 18 years old. The summer heat clung to her skin as she slipped into a dress her mother had deemed too bold, too revealing. The air smelled of whiskey and cigarette smoke as she entered the dimly lit basement where rebellion played in musical form. Jazz, notes curling around the edges of segregation like whispers of defiance. The party was one of those rare spaces where color lines blurred. Young people of all races gathered in secret, sharing drinks, laughter, and glances that could never be exchanged in daylight. It was there that Elijah first saw her. Rebecca was nothing like the white women he had been warned about. There was no fear in her eyes when they met his, no hesitation in her movement toward him. Her golden hair cascaded over her shoulders, her green eyes alight with something dangerous, curiosity, excitement, defiance. She asked his name. He hesitated. She smiled, and suddenly Elijah found himself speaking, his voice low and careful, as if testing the air between them. They talked for hours, their words flowing into the space between them with surprising ease. She was fascinated by his world, by the way he spoke, the way he thought. He was wary, but intrigued by her boldness, by how she seemed untouched by the fear that governed his existence. It was intoxicating. It was foolish. It was inevitable. When the night ended, she told him she wanted to see him again. He knew he should walk away. He didn't. The first time her father saw them together was purely accidental. Elijah had been working late at the auto shop when Rebecca appeared at the edge of the garage, her pale skin illuminated by the street lamps. Glow. His heart clenched as he glanced around, pulse hammering in his ears. She shouldn't be there. It wasn't safe, but before he could usher her away, a black car pulled up to the curb. William Ashford stepped out, and the world seemed to freeze. Elijah witnessed the moment realization dawned in the man's eyes, the way his face twisted with rage, his body tensing with the kind of fury only white men had the privilege of expressing. So openly. Rebecca tried to speak, but her father silenced her with a glare so cold it could have frozen the summer air. Then, without another word, he grabbed her by the arm and dragged her away. Elijah didn't move. He knew better than to follow. The next morning he found a note slipped under the garage door. "Stay away from my daughter." It wasn't a warning, it was a threat. And for the first time in his life, Elijah realized he wasn't afraid of white men like William Ashford. He was afraid of what he was willing to risk for Rebecca. The following weeks were hellish. Rebecca was forbidden from leaving the house. Every move she made was watched, every phone call monitored. Her father refused to acknowledge her existence, as if doing so might somehow taint him. Her mother said nothing, watching her with unreadable eyes. Rebecca fought back. She argued, screamed, begged, but her father's will was law, and no court would side with a daughter who dared defy the man who controlled her world. Yet she found a way. A note slipped into a delivery boy's pocket, a whisper in the ear of a maid who had once known love beyond color lines, a meeting late at night when the world was asleep. She found Elijah again, and this time she told him what he already knew. Her father would never allow them to be together. But she had made her choice, and she had chosen him. It was a reckless decision, a dangerous one. A white woman running away with a black man wasn't just scandalous, it was criminal. There would be no mercy, no understanding, no forgiveness. But love had never cared for laws. So in the dead of night, with nothing but the clothes on their backs and fire in their hearts, they ran. They fled from the chains of her father's power, from the weight of a world that would never accept them. They ran toward a future with no guarantees, no promises, no safety, only the hope that together they could carve out a life of their own. They had no idea that the real danger had only just begun. The night air hung thick with the weight of their decision. Rebecca's hands trembled as she clutched the small suitcase she had packed in secret, filled with only essential items, a dress, a few coins, a photograph of her mother she wasn't entirely sure why she'd brought. How absurd that so little of her life could be carried away. Her home, her name, her status, all left behind. Elijah waited at the edge of town, beneath the shadows of the abandoned train station. He had no suitcase, no photographs. His entire life had always been light enough to carry. When she saw him, she wanted to rush into his arms to let her fear dissolve away, but she maintained her composure. There was no time for tenderness, no time for hesitation. They had only one chance to disappear. The freight train bound for a factory town in Illinois would arrive within the hour. There, mixed-race couples were uncommon, but not illegal, their best option. Rebecca glanced behind her one final time, half expecting to see her father's men charging toward her, dragging her back to the life she had just abandoned. But the streets remained empty. Still, the fear lingered. Elijah took her hand, rough, calloused. "Steady? Are you certain?" His voice was quiet but firm. Rebecca swallowed the lump in her throat and nodded. They boarded the train, concealing themselves among crates and sacks of grain. No one witnessed their departure. No one knew their destination. For the first time in her life, Rebecca was free. The journey proved long and grueling. They traveled in darkness, their bodies stiff from crouching in the narrow space between cargo boxes. The train wheel's rhythm rattled through Rebecca's bones, each clank a reminder that there was no going back. Elijah barely spoke. He was constantly listening, constantly watching. Each time the train stopped, he tensed, anticipating approaching footsteps, waiting for the doors to slide open and reveal armed men ready to tear them apart. But no one came. On the second night, they reached Illinois. The factory town bore no resemblance to the elegant streets of Rebecca's childhood. The air hung thick with smoke, the buildings coated with soot, the people weary from long hours of labor. But here they were just another couple. No one looked twice at a white woman standing beside a black man. It wasn't acceptance, it was indifference, and indifference was enough. They found lodging in a cramped boarding house with thin walls and minimal privacy. Their room barely accommodated the narrow bed they shared, but it was theirs. Elijah secured work at the local steel mill, enduring 12-hour shifts in unbearable heat. Rebecca found employment as a seamstress, her fingers blistering from endless hours of stitching. It was hard, grueling work, nothing like the life she had known. But she never complained, because for the first time she had chosen this path. Their marriage took place in a tiny church on the town outskirts. There were no guests, no flowers, no music, just the two of them and a preacher who barely looked at them as he muttered the vows. There was no ring, no celebration, just quiet. Promises exchanged not for the world, but for each other. When the ceremony concluded, Rebecca stood outside the church, gazing up at the sky, feeling the moment's weight settle in her chest. She was no longer Rebecca Ashford, daughter of privilege. She was Rebecca Matthews, wife of a black man in a world that would never fully accept them, and yet she felt lighter than ever before. Their first year of marriage tested them severely. The factory town offered more safety than the South, but it was far from kind. Elijah's co-workers kept their distance, uncertain what to make of the man with a white wife. The town's women regarded Rebecca with suspicious eyes, unsure if she was lost, confused, or simply foolish. They were tolerated, but never welcomed. Money remained perpetually scarce. Some nights they went to bed hungry. Rebecca learned to mend clothes until they were more stitch than fabric. Elijah learned to stretch every dollar, bargaining for scraps at the market, working overtime until his body ached. But they endured because love had carried them this far. Yet love didn't erase fear. Rebecca's father hadn't forgotten her. Letters arrived at the boarding house, each colder than the last. The first was a demand, "Come home now." The second was a warning, "You don't understand what you've done." The third was a threat, "You will regret this." Rebecca burned them all, but the fear lingered. Her father wasn't a man who accepted defeat. One day he would find her, and she didn't know what he would do when he did. That fear infiltrated her. Dreams whispering in her mind when she walked through the market, when she noticed men in suits glancing at her too long, when she heard footsteps behind her at night, and so, without telling Elijah, she began saving money. Initially just a few, coins tucked beneath the mattress, then a few bills hidden in her dress hem. She told herself it was nothing, just a precaution, a habit born from fear, not doubt. But deep down, she knew the truth. She had chosen Elijah, but part of her still feared that one day she might have to leave him behind. The years passed, and life in the factory town settled into a pattern. It was never easy, never truly comfortable, but it was theirs. Elijah worked himself to exhaustion, coming home each night with aching muscles and soot-stained hands. Rebecca stitched clothes until her fingers bled, her once delicate hands now rough with calluses. They built a life together, piece by fragile piece, and then their first child came. Rebecca had never been more terrified. She had expected joy, had imagined placing her newborn in Elijah's arms and feeling their family grow. But when she saw the tiny boy wrapped in blankets, she felt something else entirely, guilt, because as she looked at her son, she couldn't stop. Thinking about the child she had abandoned. She had been 17, a different girl in a different life. Her family had concealed the pregnancy, hiding her behind closed doors, telling friends and relatives she had fallen ill and needed rest. She had never been given a choice. When the baby was born, a boy just like this one, she had barely been allowed to hold him before he was taken away. Her father had arranged everything, a quiet adoption, a discreet payment to ensure there would be no records, no connection to the Ashford name. Rebecca had cried for weeks, but eventually learned to silence the ache. She told herself it was for the best, that the child would have a better life without her, without the burden of scandal. Then she had met Elijah, and she had buried that past beneath a new life, a new love. But now, holding her newborn son in her arms, the past clawed its way back. She had another child out there, a son lost before he had a chance to know her. She never told Elijah. She couldn't. The weight of that secret settled into her bones, a quiet, gnawing guilt that never fully left her. Their son, Daniel, grew quickly. His skin a rich blend of his parents' colors, his eyes sharp like his father's, his smile soft like his mother's. He was the first thing they had truly built together, a living testament to their love. Yet Rebecca couldn't shake the feeling that something was missing. She dreamed of the child she had given away. She wondered if he looked like Daniel, if he had her nose, if he had Elijah's steady gaze. She wondered if he ever thought of the mother he had never known. She never spoke of it. Instead, she buried it deeper and devoted herself to Daniel, to Elijah, to their life. But the past had a way of returning, even when you tried to outrun. Und years passed, and another child came, Rachel. She was wild from the beginning, loud and fearless, her laughter filling their tiny boarding house rooms. She had none of her mother's softness, none of her father's quietude. She was a force unto herself, a storm in a little girl's body. Rebecca adored her, but with each passing year the secret grew heavier. She imagined her firstborn, now a young man living in some unknown city, perhaps wondering about his origins. She prayed he had been given a good life. She prayed he never felt abandoned, and she prayed that Elijah would never discover the truth. But secrets poison everything. Rebecca became more withdrawn, more distant. At first, Elijah attributed it to exhaustion. Parenthood was demanding, and their life was hardly easy. But then he noticed the pattern, the way she would stare into the distance, lost in thought, how she hesitated when answering questions about her past, the way she flinched whenever adoption was mentioned, even casually. Elijah wasn't a man who pried. He respected silence, understood that some wounds were too deep to touch. But this was different. This was his wife, and she was slipping away. One night, long after the children had gone to bed, he found her sitting at their small wooden table, staring at a torn piece of fabric in her lap. She didn't notice him at first, and for the first time in their marriage, Elijah felt a distance between them that terrified him. There were things she wasn't telling him, things she never would, and for the first time he wondered if he truly knew his wife at all. Rebecca had always known that marriage wasn't the fairy tale depicted in books and films. She had known, even as a child, that love and survival were often separate matters. But she had never expected to live in a marriage built on both. Elijah was a good husband, steady, patient, reliable. He worked tirelessly to provide for her and the children, never once complaining about the exhaustion from 12-hour shifts at the steel mill. And he loved her. She had no doubt about that. But she carried a secret heavier than any love could lighten. Because when she had married him, she hadn't done it purely out of love. She had done it out of fear. She had grown up knowing her father would choose her husband. That was tradition in families like hers, old Southern money, bloodlines tracing back to colonial wealth. Women didn't choose, they were chosen. Her father had spent years grooming her for marriage, introducing her to bankers' sons, lawyers, businessmen. He had inspected them like racehorses, evaluating their pedigree, their wealth, their particular brand of arrogance. And she had played along, smiled, nodded, allowed them to take her hand, to lead her across ballroom floors. She had followed expectations until Elijah, until she had seen something different, a man who didn't belong in her world, a man who made her question everything she had been taught. And she had run to him not because she loved him, but because she had been terrified of what her life would become if she didn't. The realization sickened her because now, all these years later, she did love him. She loved how he kissed her forehead before leaving for work each morning. She loved how he rocked their children to sleep, his voice low and deep like the earth's rumbling. She loved that he never raised his voice, even when angry. She loved how he made her feel safe. Yet she had never told him the truth, that when she married him it hadn't been a choice of the heart, but one of survival. She told herself it didn't matter, that love had come in time, that their stories beginning made no difference as long as it had led them here. But then came the whispers, not from Elijah but from the world around them, from women in the market who still looked at her as though she had lost her mind, from men who sneered when Elijah passed them on the street, from children who asked questions she couldn't answer. "Mama, why do some people look at Daddy like he doesn't belong? Mama, why do the other kids say I'm different? Mama, why doesn't Grandpa ever visit?" And she had no answers because the truth was ugly. The truth was that she had spent so many years trying to forget her origins that she had never considered what it meant for her children to exist in the space between two worlds. And worst of all, she had never told Elijah. She had never told him that in those first months, when times were hardest, when she had been exhausted and frightened, she had contemplated leaving. She had counted her hidden money in the night's quiet hours, wondering if it would be enough to take the children and disappear. She had never planned to go through with it, but the fact that she had considered it haunted her. Elijah was no fool. He noticed how she avoided certain questions, how she hesitated when asked about her past, how she grew quiet when their children discussed race, belonging, the things that set them apart. And he wondered not just about her secrets, but about her love. Did she love him because he was her choice, or because he had been her only escape? It was a question he feared asking, because he wasn't sure he wanted the answer. Rebecca had convinced herself the past was behind her. She had built a new life, a family, a home that, while modest, was safe. The outside world still regarded them with suspicion, but inside they had found something resembling peace. But peace was fragile, and the past had a way of returning when least expected. The first letter arrived on an ordinary afternoon, slipped under their door while she was shopping, a thin envelope resting on the wooden floor like a ghost from another life. She stared at it before picking it up. There was no return address, just her name. The handwriting was unmistakable. Her father's! Her stomach twisted as she tore it open. The message inside was brief and cold. "You do not understand what you have done." She felt sick. Years had passed since she had last heard from him. After she had fled, he had sent letters demanding her return, then threatening her, then nothing. She had thought he had given up. She had been wrong. For weeks she waited for another letter, but none came. She tried to dismiss it from her mind, but its weight settled in her chest like a stone. What did he mean? Was it merely another attempt to control her, or something worse? She told herself not to worry, but then she saw the man. It was early evening. She had taken the children to the market, letting them chase each other between stalls as she bargained for potatoes and fresh milk. And then she saw him, a white man in a suit, standing at the street corner. He wasn't shopping. He wasn't speaking to anyone. He was watching her. A chill ran through her. She told herself she was imagining things, but the next day she saw him again, and the day after that, always at a distance, always watching. She didn't tell Elijah. She knew what he would say. Either, "You're seeing things," or worse, "If it is your father, we need to face him." But she didn't want to face him. She just wanted him to remain in the past where he belonged. And then the second letter came. This one was different, not from her father, but from someone she had never expected to hear from again. "I know who you are." Her heart stopped. She read it again. The handwriting was unfamiliar, the message vague, But she knew someone had discovered her first child, the son she had abandoned all those years ago, a secret buried so deeply it had nearly been forgotten. And now someone knew. She felt her world beginning to crack. For days she said nothing. She barely slept, barely ate. Elijah noticed. He asked what was wrong. She told him it was nothing, but he knew better. And when he found the letter, crumpled and hidden at the bottom of her dresser drawer, she saw the shift in his eyes, a realization that there were aspects of her he had never known. After all these years, perhaps he didn't know his wife at all. Rebecca had always known the past would eventually catch up with her. She had spent years convincing herself that her current life was separate from the one she had left behind, that the woman she had been, the privileged daughter of William Ashford, the girl too afraid to fight for her first child, the young bride who had run into Elijah's arms, not from love but desperation, had vanished. But the truth was that woman had always resided within her, hiding in the corners of her mind, waiting for the moment when she would be forced to confront everything she had buried. And now, as her body betrayed her and time pressed down on her bones, she knew that moment had arrived. The illness began. Gradually, a cough here, a dizzy spell there, nothing she took seriously. But then the pain started, a sharp, relentless ache in her chest that stole her breath, that made simple movements unbearable. Elijah noticed first. He observed her, struggling to lift the iron pot from the stove, saw how she winced when she thought no one was looking. Initially he said nothing, but one night when she collapsed while folding laundry, he knew they could no longer ignore it. The doctor came the next morning, a white man, middle-aged, his expression unreadable as he pressed his fingers to Rebecca's wrist, listening to her pulse. He asked questions, nodded at her answers, frowned at her silence. When he spoke, his voice was calm, too calm. She had seen that kind of calm before, the kind that softened bad news, that feigned kindness, while, offering no solutions, she was dying. It was her heart, he said, weakening, failing, nothing to be done. Elijah stood silently, hands clenched at his sides. Rebecca closed her eyes. She had expected fear, but all she felt was exhaustion. She had been running from so many things for so many years. Maybe it was time to stop. Elijah refused to accept it. He spent days searching for another doctor, another answer, another hope. But the answer never changed. Her time was running out, and she knew, more than anything, that she could not leave this world without revealing the truth. She had spent a lifetime keeping secrets. It was time to set them free. One evening, as the sun dipped low behind the rooftops, she asked Elijah to sit with her. He hesitated. There was something different in her voice, something final. He was afraid, not of her dying, but of what she was about to say. She told him everything, about the money she had hidden away, about how, in their marriage's early years, she had doubted him, doubted their life together, feared that someday she would need to escape. She told him about her first child, the son she had been forced to abandon, the life she had erased. She told him about her father, how even in absence he had haunted her, how she had never truly been free of him, and finally she revealed the worst truth of all, that she had not married him for love, that she had married him because she had been afraid, because he had been her escape, not her choice. Elijah sat in silence. She couldn't read his expression, couldn't tell if he felt anger or pain or nothing at all. She felt tears slide down her cheeks, felt the weight of a lifetime's guilt pressing against her chest. And then she told him the only thing she knew to be true, that despite everything, despite the lies, the secrets, the mistakes, she had come to love him truly, deeply, more than she had ever thought possible. She loved him, and she hoped, in the end, that would be enough. The days blurred after that. Elijah said little. He cared for her, held her when the pain grew unbearable, wiped her forehead when fever came, carried her to bed when her legs could no longer support her, but he did not tell her how he felt. She did not ask. She didn't need to know, because in the end, it didn't matter. He was still there, and for her that was enough. One night, as cold crept through the house and her body's weight became too much to bear, she felt Elijah's arms around her. He whispered something so softly she barely heard it, and as she closed her eyes for the final time, she smiled because she knew in that moment that he had forgiven her, or maybe he hadn't. Maybe it didn't matter. Maybe love wasn't about perfection. Maybe it was about choosing to stay even when it hurt, even when the past could never be undone, even when goodbye was the only thing left to say. The house was too quiet, the kind of silence that settled into the walls, into the space between breaths, into the absence of a body that would never rise again. Rebecca was gone, and Elijah sat in the silence of their bedroom, staring at the empty space beside him, at the pillow that still held the faintest impression of her head. For days he hadn't moved it, as if leaving it untouched might trick him into believing she was still there. But the truth was inescapable. She was gone, and she had left him with a lifetime of secrets. Her confession had broken something within him, not because she had lied, but because he had never truly suspected. For all their years together, for all their shared moments, he had believed in her, believed their love had always been genuine, built on trust rather than necessity, and now he didn't know what to believe. Had their life been a lie? Had she ever really chosen him, or had he only ever been an escape, a refuge, a path away from a life she couldn't bear? He had spent his entire life fighting to be seen as a man in a world that called him less, that told him he was never enough. And now, even in the place he had called home, even with the woman he had loved, he questioned whether he had ever truly belonged. The letters remained, the ones from her father, yellowed with age, tucked away, in the drawer where she had hidden them. The threats, the warnings, and then the last one, the one that had shattered her in those final weeks. I know who you are. A different handwriting, a different fear. She had never explained what it meant, but now he had to know. He opened the drawer, his fingers trembling as he pulled out the stack of old papers, unfolding them one by one. The last letter was brief, a single sentence. Your son is looking for you. Elijah froze. The room tilted. He read the words again, his breath catching in his throat. Their son, not Daniel, not Rachel, the one she had given away. The one he had never known existed. His hands tightened around the paper. There had been another child, another piece of her she had kept from him. A son who had been searching for answers, and now she was gone, leaving only questions that could never be answered. Elijah sat in the silence, staring at the letter, at the truth of a life he had never truly known, and for the first time since Rebecca's death, he allowed himself to grieve, not just for her, but for the life they had built, a life he had believed was real, a life he now realized had been haunted by ghosts. The house felt different without her, not just the emptiness, the absence of her voice, the soft rustling of her movements as she folded clothes or hummed in the kitchen. It was something deeper, the weight of all that remained unsaid. Elijah had spent decades believing he understood his wife, believing the love they had built was real, unshakable. Now, in the days following her death, that belief crumbled like sand through his fingers. He sat at the kitchen table, the letter before him. Your son is looking for you. The words felt like a wound that wouldn't heal. Rebecca had carried this. Truth for years had let it fester inside her, had let it consume her, and she had never told him. Oliver clenched his fists, staring at the faded ink. How could she? How could she sit across from him at dinner every night knowing she had another child in the world? How could she watch their children grow and never once speak his name? Had she intended to take this secret to her grave? She had confessed so much before dying. the money, the doubts, the fact that she had not initially married him for love. But this she had kept hidden, and now Elijah was left to deal with it alone. Daniel and Rachel didn't understand. They were grieving too, but their pain was different. To them, Rebecca had been a mother, steady and constant, the center of their world. To Elijah, she had been more, his partner, his home, the woman he had fought for, the woman he had trusted above all others. Now he wasn't sure what had been real and what had been carefully constructed illusion. Was love still love if it began as a lie? He didn't know, and he wasn't sure he wanted to find out. Days passed. Elijah worked because it was the only thing that made sense. The steel mill didn't care about grief, didn't care that his wife was gone, that his world had shifted beneath his feet. It demanded the same every day, his sweat, his strength, his time. That at least was simple, but nothing else was. Not when he walked through the market and felt strangers' eyes upon him, their silent questions hanging in the air. Not when he lay in bed at night and reached for her out of habit, only to find the sheets cold and empty. And not when he opened the drawer and saw the letter waiting, taunting him with a truth he wasn't sure he was prepared to face. One evening, after the children were asleep, he sat at the table and unfolded the letter again. There was no name, no address, just a single, brutal fact. A son out there searching for answers, and Elijah was the only one left to provide them. He wrestled with it for weeks. What good would come from seeking this boy, this man now? What did he owe a stranger who had never been part of their lives? But then another thought surfaced. What if it had been Daniel? What if someone had taken his son from him, erased him, made him a secret? Wouldn't he want to know? Wouldn't he deserve to? And so one morning, before the sun had fully risen, Elijah left the house. He walked to the post office, the letter clutched in his hand. And for the first time since Rebecca's death, he made a decision. He would find this boy. He would give him the truth that had been stolen from him, even if it hurt, even if it changed everything, because the past had already taken too much, and Elijah wasn't going to let it take anything more.